welcome back to another Demis Hellen tutorial. I'm going to make a quick video covering OTT and how to get a little bit more drive and mid-range out of your sub bass. So if you're the person that's looking for a little bit more mid in the sub and you don't want to really compensate a little bit more with the mid basses, then this is a tutorial for you. If you're wanting the underlying sort of sub bass, then this is probably not the tutorial for you, but nonetheless it is probably some handy information that you can use for sound design in your next track. Let's isolate what we're looking at on the sub. And it's not sounding like really that we've got too much mid going on there, but if I turn OTT off, you're going to hear this sub bass drop back. And bear in mind, I have built my effects chain around the fact that it is a sort of sub that I'm going to have a little bit more mid in. So it is going to drop in level, but you can imagine if that was a bit louder, you're going to have your classic sort of under the kick sub. And the difference between the two isn't massively drastic, but you can hear there's more mid-range coming from the OTT just based on the settings that I've used to just pull it out a little bit. So let's have a listen to that in context with the kick and the percussion, for example. Because always do things in context. So kick and percussion with the sub. You can hear it hasn't really got the drive, but at the same time the level's not up because I've set it up for OTT. Then you can hear with OTT we've got a nice little pulse coming through, and obviously it's more up to level where I've balanced it with the kick. So you can hear that there's a lot more mid-range coming through, but really I'm just adding drive and power to keep up the pace of 138, because sometimes you can sound a lot slower if you haven't got that right balance between the kick and the sub. Okay, so I've just turned off OTT and we've got a new instance here, and I'm going to turn this one on. So you can see down the left-hand side we've got the original OTT now bypassed. And what we're looking for is to have a combination of the depth and time, which is essentially your mix, and time is your attack and release. Let's just turn that roughly back to the middle. We've got the high, mid and low controls for the EQ, and then we've got upwards and downwards, which is essentially expansion and compression. So not upwards compression, doesn't exist, expansion and compression. So the first thing I'm going to do is just turn everything off. So we've just got our bass. And I'm going to start by getting in the ballpark area just using the EQ here. And from that you could see I was going from the extreme of like 0 to 100 to see what it was doing to the sound, and then I can just dial it back in and use my ears to get it into sort of an area where I'm expecting it to be. So I've dropped the highs, not really doing anything to the sound, there's not really any highs in there, but I've dropped them anyway just to make sure that we keep it nice and clean. Then the mids I've boosted because that is the sort of area that I'm wanting to boost. And you can see I've not moved any of the middle section because I don't need to for this particular one. And then the lows have been dropped a little bit. So it's going to sound a little bit underwhelming at the moment, but we're going to fix that with these two controls down here. So let's have a listen to what upwards does, and then we'll listen to what downwards does on the extreme left and right, and then we can dial these in. So the quick lowdown on these, the upwards is not really doing anything for me. If we was to sort of like expand it beyond onto towards the right, you'd be getting a little bit more of a transient out of there, but I've got 3 mid-bass layers which control the transients, so I don't really need that section. But with the compression here, you can see that I've lowered this. So boosting it to the right is obviously crushing it beyond belief, depending on the settings that you'll have later on. but I've brought it down so it's kind of just starting to compress the sound, and you can hear that the bass came back. Even though I've lowered it here, the bass has come back with downwards compression, so that's why I dialed this down a little bit on the EQ to compensate for this, because it had gone too boomy. So moving on to time, let's have a listen to the extremes of this one. And you'll have seen the visuals down here. When we're to the left, quite erratic, fast attack and release. To the right, slower and more controlled. And because it's a bass, I want a balance between the warmth and the speed. So I'm going to dial it from the middle position, probably more to the right here. So let's just get it roughly at 100 where it was at the beginning. And you can hear more warmth coming in already. That's too much. But somewhere around there sounds good. And you can hear that we're getting a balance of warmth now from time and the downwards compression. So that's why I tamed this low just to start with. And then I can bring it back up if I need to balance it back out. Then finally, we can use our mix here under depth, which is going to give us some of the original signal back into our process signal, also known as parallel compression. So let's have a listen to that in context with some kick and percussion. Turn the depth down. And if you're wondering why I use the depth control to bypass the effect, it's because we don't have a bypass button on here, and you could hear earlier in the video it was making a horrible clicking sound. We just have the activate and deactivate button here. If we go to Pro Q3 over here, we've got a bypass effect and an activate effect button. So there we are, we have a little bit more mid in our sub, and again balance this to all the usual sort of rules and strategies that you have. Use span. Make sure your kick and your bass are balanced. I've done a couple of videos on this, so you can go and check them out. They're on the channel somewhere. And just make sure the levels are nice. Don't go by the levels on here. Make sure your audio levels on span of the kick and the bass are matching whilst you're doing this as well. And there we are, we have OTT. Some of you might not approve of using OTT on a sub, but it gets the result, and it is another option for you in your arsenal with a free plugin. So thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions about what you've seen in today's video, let me know down in the comments. And with that said, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.